I was lying in that hospital bed, my body broken from the car accident, when I heard my daughter-in-law's voice in the hallway asking the nurse about my will and beneficiaries. If her condition worsens, who inherits? Vanessa asked, and my son Nathan, my only child, the boy I raised alone, the man I sacrificed everything for, whispered back. Let's not waste time here then. She doesn't have anything worth waiting for anyway. I heard them laugh softly, and in that moment, with 4 broken ribs and a shattered leg, the real pain wasn't in my body. It was knowing my own son was disappointed I was still alive. If you've ever had your heart broken by the people you loved most, please leave a comment. Your story matters. And subscribe, because what I'm about to share with you is how this grandmother refused to be a victim. Let me tell you exactly how I ended up in that hospital bed, listening to my child discuss my death like a business inconvenience. My name is Eleanor Brooks, and I'm 68 years old. Just 3 months before that accident, something extraordinary happened that I told no one about. Not even my son. My Aunt Beatrice passed away and left me her entire estate, $42 million. I couldn't believe it when her attorney, Mr. Thomas Lang, told me. I'd been living on Social Security and a small pension, clipping coupons at the grocery store, and suddenly I had more money than I could imagine. My very first thought was Nathan. I could help him expand his contracting business. I could secure my granddaughter Sophie's future. I could finally stop worrying about being a burden in my old age. I drove to his house that same evening, so excited I could barely contain myself. But when I arrived, Vanessa blocked the doorway with a tight smile and said they were busy. Nathan appeared behind her, barely looked at me, and said he'd call me later. He never did. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried reaching him repeatedly. He was always too busy, always rushing somewhere, always had an excuse. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't name it. That small voice inside, the one that comes from years of being a mother who notices everything, told me to be careful. So I met with Mr. Lang again and asked him to keep the inheritance completely confidential. We set up trusts and accounts with my name only. Nathan would know nothing until I decided the time was right. 2 weeks later, I was driving home from the pharmacy when another driver ran a red light. I saw the silver sedan coming at me, tried to brake, but there was no time. The impact threw my car spinning across the intersection. Metal crunched, glass exploded around me, and then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in Tampa General Hospital. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. For broken ribs, a shattered femur, severe concussion, internal bruising that painted my entire torso purple and black. A woman my age doesn't usually survive that kind of collision, they said. I should be grateful. But gratitude was the last thing I felt when Nathan finally visited. Once in that entire first week. He stayed 20 minutes, spent 19 of them on his phone. Vanessa stood by the door, checking her watch like she had somewhere better to be. They didn't ask about my pain or my recovery. They asked about my finances. Did I have a will? A power of attorney? Who was listed on my accounts? I was too weak to understand why it mattered, too drugged to see what was happening. But Marie, my nurse, a kind woman with gentle hands and knowing eyes, seemed troubled after their visits. She'd stay extra minutes with me, smoothing my hair, making sure I wasn't alone. Then came that conversation in the hallway. Vanessa asking about beneficiaries and wills. Nathan dismissing me as not worth their time because I had nothing. Their soft laughter as they walked away. I lay there with my eyes closed, pain radiating through every inch of my broken body, and felt something inside me break that had nothing to do with the accident. This was my son, my baby boy, the child I'd raised alone after his father died. I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, cleaning houses during the day, waitressing at night, living on instant noodles and cheap coffee so he could have everything he needed. I'd been at every baseball game, every school event, every important moment of his life. When he married Vanessa, I'd given them money for their house down payment. Money I'd saved for years, meant for my own security. I'd babysat Sophie whenever they needed, sometimes for days while they vacationed in places I'd never see. I'd never asked for anything back because that's what mothers do. We give until there's nothing left. And now he was standing outside my hospital room, disappointed that I'd survived. When they finally entered, I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady. I listened to Vanessa rifle through my purse, heard papers rustling, heard Nathan's frustrated sigh. They stayed maybe 5 minutes. Neither touched my hand or kissed my forehead. They searched through my belongings like I was already dead, looking for something they wouldn't find. After they left, I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, tears sliding down my temples into my hair. Marie came in shortly after, saw my face, and squeezed my hand without saying a word. She knew. Somehow she knew. That's when I made my decision. I would recover. I would get stronger. And I would find out exactly what Nathan and Vanessa were planning. Because my son didn't know about the $42 million, and suddenly I was very, very glad I'd kept it secret. Something dark was happening, something that would have been so much worse if they'd known about Aunt Beatrice's inheritance. And I needed to understand just how far my own child was willing to go. The woman who'd raised him with unconditional love was gone, replaced by someone who had to protect herself. I didn't like this new version of me, but I was learning fast that survival sometimes means becoming someone you never thought you'd be. Even at 68, even from a hospital bed, even with a broken body and a shattered heart, I could still fight back. They just didn't know it yet. The next 3 weeks in that hospital were the loneliest of my entire life, and I'd been alone before. I'd buried my husband at 35 and raised a child by myself, but this was different. This was being alone while people visited. This was understanding that the person standing at your bedside wishes you weren't there at all. Nathan came twice more during my recovery. Both times he brought papers for me to sign, insurance forms, he said, though I noticed they asked for information about bank accounts and assets. My hands shook too much to hold a pen properly, I told him. The truth was I didn't trust what I was signing anymore. Each time he'd grow impatient, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. Vanessa never came back at all after that first visit. But Sophie came. My 16-year-old granddaughter showed up on the 4th day with a bouquet of daisies from the grocery store and tears streaming down her face. She sat beside my bed and held my hand so gently, afraid she might hurt me. She told me her parents said I was fine, that I didn't need visitors, that I was resting and shouldn't be disturbed. But her friend's mother worked at the hospital and told her the truth about how serious my injuries were. Sophie had taken the bus here by herself. I watched her cry over me, this sweet girl who still had goodness in her heart, and I wondered where Nathan's goodness had gone. When had it disappeared? Had it been gradual, or had I simply refused to see it? Marie helped me make a phone call on the 5th day. My hands couldn't work the phone properly yet, so she dialed the number I gave her, Mr. Thomas Lang's office. When he answered, I asked her to step out for privacy, and I told him everything. The overheard conversation, Nathan's questions about my will, the papers he wanted me to sign, the way they'd searched my purse. Mr. Lang was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. He told me that 2 days after my accident, someone had called his office claiming to be my son, asking detailed questions about Aunt Beatrice's estate and whether I'd inherited anything. Mr. Lang hadn't confirmed anything, of course, attorney-client privilege, but the call troubled him. He'd been planning to mention it to me once I was stronger. My son had been searching for money I might have, money he didn't even know existed, which meant this wasn't about the inheritance at all. This was about whatever they thought I might have, whatever they believed they were entitled to. I asked Mr. Lang to recommend a private investigator, someone discreet, someone good. He gave me a name, James Carver, a retired detective who specialized in elder abuse cases. Mr. Lang said he'd contact James for me and have him come to the hospital. James came 3 days later. He was maybe 55, with kind eyes and a quiet manner that put me at ease immediately. He sat in the chair beside my bed and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said he'd seen cases like this before. Adult children who viewed aging parents as obstacles to inheritance rather than people to be loved. It happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. He laid out a plan. He'd put surveillance on my house and on Nathan's. He'd run background checks on both Nathan and Vanessa, look into their financial situation, see what might be motivating this behavior. And he'd document everything. Every visit, every conversation, every action they took. If they were planning something, we'd have evidence. I signed his contract with a shaking hand, using money from an account Mr. Lang had set up for me. Nathan knew nothing about it. My son knew nothing about any of it, the $42 million, the attorney, the investigator. He thought I was just a helpless old woman in a hospital bed. The physical therapy was brutal. Every movement sent pain shooting through my body, but I pushed through it because I needed to be strong for what was coming. I needed to go home to see what Nathan and Vanessa would do next. The therapist praised my determination, said most women my age gave up easier. She didn't know I had reasons to fight that had nothing to do with walking again. At night, when the hospital was quiet and dark, I'd lie awake remembering Nathan as a little boy. The way he'd crawl into bed with me after nightmares about his father. The way he'd made me cards for Mother's Day with crayon drawings and misspelled words. The way he'd hugged me so tight before leaving for college, promising he'd never forget everything I'd done for him. Where was that boy now? When had he become this stranger who calculated my worth in dollars and waited for my death like it was a business transaction? I thought about all the warning signs I'd ignored over the years. The way he'd stop calling unless he needed something. The way he'd borrowed money and never paid it back. The way Vanessa had slowly isolated him from me, scheduling holidays at her family's house, always being too busy when I asked to visit. I told myself it was normal, that adult children got busy with their own lives. I'd made excuses because the truth was too painful to face. But I wasn't making excuses anymore. James called me on my second week of recovery with his first report. Nathan and Vanessa were in serious financial trouble. His contracting business was failing. They'd taken out loans against their house and maxed out credit cards. They were drowning, and they'd been counting on me dying to save them. They'd been counting on an inheritance that didn't exist, not one they knew about anyway. And when I didn't die in that accident, when I survived against the odds, they'd started planning something else. James had recorded them meeting with an attorney who specialized in guardianship cases. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. They were going to try to take control of everything I had. I closed my eyes and felt something hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be soft. This was war. My own son had declared war on me, and he had no idea who he was fighting. I was released from the hospital on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the accident. Nathan didn't offer to pick me up. Instead, I hired a medical transport service that Mr. Lang arranged, and they brought me home to my small house on Elm Street in my quiet neighborhood near Tampa. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it that day I went to the pharmacy. My coffee cup was still in the sink. The book I'd been reading was still open on the side table. But nothing felt the same because I wasn't the same person who'd lived here before. James had been busy while I was gone. He'd installed tiny cameras throughout my house, in the living room, kitchen, hallway, even my bedroom. They were invisible unless you knew where to look. He'd also given me a small recording device that looked like a regular pen, easy to keep in my pocket or purse. Everything would be documented now. Everything would be evidence. I was home for less than 3 hours when Nathan and Vanessa arrived. They didn't call first. They just walked in using the spare key I'd given them years ago, acting like they owned the place. I was sitting in my recliner, my legs still in a cast, when they came into the living room. Nathan looked around with an expression I'd never seen before, calculating, assessing. Vanessa went straight to my small desk in the corner and started opening drawers. Neither of them asked how I was feeling. Neither mentioned my injuries or my recovery. They were searching for something. I watched them from my chair, my heart breaking all over again. This was really happening. My son was actually doing this. Vanessa found my checkbook and bank statements, the ones for my regular account with about $800 in it. She held them up to Nathan with a disappointed look. He shook his head slightly frustrated. They'd been hoping for more. They'd been hoping I had money hidden somewhere. "Mom," Nathan finally said, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about your situation. You can't live alone anymore. Not after this accident. You need help managing things." I played along. I made my voice weak and confused. "I'm managing fine, sweetheart. The doctors said I'll heal." Vanessa sat down on the couch across from me, her face arranged in fake concern. "Eleanor, be realistic. You're almost 70. You can barely walk. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here to help you?" They talked for over an hour about assisted living facilities, about selling my house, about how they could handle my finances to make things easier for me. The words were kind, but the intention underneath was clear as glass. They wanted control. They wanted access to whatever I had. I told them I needed time to think about it. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They left shortly after, taking my checkbook with them. Vanessa said she'd help me pay my bills since I was too weak to write checks properly. I didn't argue. The moment they were gone, I called James. He'd watched everything through the camera feeds on his laptop. He'd recorded every word, every gesture, every moment of them searching through my belongings. "That's exactly what I needed," he said. "Keep playing vulnerable. Let them think they're winning." Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan and Vanessa came by almost daily. They brought papers for me to sign, power of attorney forms, documents that would give them access to my accounts, papers that would let them make medical decisions for me. Each time I'd hold the pen with shaking hands and then say I couldn't see well enough to read it, or my head hurt too much to concentrate. I'd promised to sign tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. I watched their frustration grow, watched the fake smiles become harder to maintain, watched Vanessa snap at Nathan when they thought I couldn't hear from the other room. James kept me updated on everything his surveillance revealed. They'd already contacted a real estate agent about selling my house. They'd looked into guardianship procedures. Vanessa had told her sister on the phone that once they had control of my assets, they could pay off all their debts and start fresh. She laughed when she said it. What they didn't know was that I was gathering evidence. Every visit was recorded. Every paper they tried to make me sign was photographed and sent to Mr. Lang. Every conversation was documented. I was building a case against my own son, and each piece of evidence felt like another nail in my heart. Sophie came to visit me alone one afternoon when her parents thought she was at soccer practice. She sat on the edge of my couch, her young face troubled and older than it should be. "Grandma," she said quietly, "something's wrong. Mom and Dad keep talking about your money in your house. They keep saying they need to take care of things before you waste everything. But you don't have a lot of money, do you?" I took her hand. "No, sweetheart. I don't." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I didn't think so. That's why this doesn't make sense. Why are they acting like this if there's nothing to get?" I couldn't tell her the truth, that her parents had become people who'd squeeze blood from a stone if they thought it might turn to gold. That greed had poisoned them so thoroughly they'd terrorize an elderly woman over $800 and an old house that might sell for maybe $150,000. But James had uncovered something else. Nathan and Vanessa had already borrowed money from friends and family, promising they'd pay it back once they received an inheritance. They'd spent money they didn't have on the assumption I'd die, or they'd control my finances. They'd built a house of cards, and now they were desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. James warned me to be careful, to keep my phone charged, to never let them corner me alone without the cameras and recording devices running. I was starting to understand that this might get worse before it got better. But I was ready. After 68 years of putting others first, I was finally putting myself first. It was a Tuesday evening 3 months after the accident, when everything came to a head. I'd been home for 6 weeks, getting stronger every day, though I pretended to be more fragile than I was. Nathan and Vanessa had grown increasingly aggressive in their visits, their patience wearing thin like old fabric about to tear. James had called me that morning with news that made my stomach turn. His surveillance had caught Nathan and Vanessa meeting with a doctor they'd found, someone willing to sign papers declaring me mentally incompetent in exchange for a fee. They hadn't even had him examine me. They were going to forge an evaluation and petition the court for emergency guardianship within the week. Mr. Lang and James decided it was time to act. We'd gathered enough evidence. We had recordings, photographs, documented attempts at coercion, proof of their financial desperation and their scheme. But we needed one final piece. A clear threat, something undeniable that would ensure the authorities took this seriously. So we set a trap. Mr. Lang had prepared a fake document, official-looking but legally meaningless, that appeared to be a power of attorney form giving Nathan full control over my finances. I'd called Nathan that morning, my voice deliberately weak and confused, and told him I was ready to sign, that I understood now that I needed help, that I wanted him to take care of everything. I could hear the relief in his voice, the eagerness. He said he'd come by that evening with Vanessa. They'd bring dinner, make it special, he said. Like old times. James was parked down the street in an unmarked car. Detective Laura Bennett from the Tampa Police Department Elder Abuse Unit was with him. We'd brought her in 2 days earlier with all our evidence, and she'd agreed to be present for what was about to happen. Mr. Lang had alerted the district attorney's office. Everyone was ready. Nathan and Vanessa arrived at 6 o'clock with Chinese takeout. They were almost giddy, smiling more genuinely than they had in months. They thought they'd won. They thought the finish line was finally in sight. We ate dinner together at my small kitchen table, and I watched them carefully. Vanessa kept glancing at her watch. Nathan kept looking toward my bedroom, where I'd told him I'd left the papers on my dresser. They barely touched their food. They were too excited. After dinner, Nathan cleared his throat. "Mom, why don't we take care of that paperwork now? Get it done so you don't have to worry about it anymore." I nodded slowly, playing my part. "Yes, I suppose we should. My head is clear right now. Better to do it while I can think straight." He fetched the papers from my bedroom, the fake document Mr. Lang had left there, along with some real bank statements for my regular account showing that pathetic $800 balance. I watched Nathan's face fall slightly when he saw those numbers again. Still, he brought everything to the kitchen table. That's when Vanessa made her mistake. She leaned forward, her fake sweetness cracking just slightly, and said something that the recording device in my cardigan pocket captured perfectly. "Once you sign this, Eleanor, Nathan will have access to all your accounts. Everything. So if there's any money you haven't told us about, any secret accounts or inheritances, now's the time to mention them. Because we'll find out anyway, and it'll be easier if you just tell us now." There was an edge to her voice, almost threatening. Nathan shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. I set down the pen I'd been holding. "Secret accounts? I don't understand." Nathan leaned back, his expression hardening. "Mom, we know Aunt Beatrice died. We know she was wealthy, and we know you visited her more than you told us. So let's stop playing games. Where's the inheritance?" My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Beatrice left everything to a cat sanctuary in Sarasota. I got nothing." Vanessa laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "You're lying. You've been lying this whole time. We talked to people at her church. They said she talked about leaving everything to you." I watched my son's face transform into something I didn't recognize. All pretense of care or concern was gone. This was raw greed, naked and ugly. "Sign the papers, Mom," Nathan said quietly. "Sign them now, or we'll have you declared incompetent tomorrow. We already have a doctor's evaluation. You'll be in a state facility by the end of the week, and we'll have control anyway. This way is easier." There it was. The threat we needed. Clear, unmistakable, caught on recording. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing my child's face, and felt something inside me finally let go. The last thread of hope that maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe there was some explanation, maybe my boy was still in there somewhere. That thread snapped. "No," I said simply. Nathan stood up fast, his chair scraping against the floor. "What did you say?" I said no. "I'm not signing anything. And you're going to leave my house now." Vanessa stood too, her face flushed with anger. "You stupid old woman. You think you have a choice? We've been keeping you alive, visiting you, pretending to care. You owe us. After everything we've done." "Everything you've done?" My voice was stronger now, months of pain and betrayal finally breaking through. "You mean searching my purse while I was unconscious? Hoping I'd die so you could inherit? Planning to lock me away and steal what little I have?" Nathan moved toward me, and for a moment I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "You're going to regret this." That's when James and Detective Bennett came through my front door. They'd heard everything through the wire I was wearing. They'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Nathan and Vanessa froze. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Nathan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Detective Bennett identified herself and informed them they were being detained for investigation of elder financial abuse, attempted coercion, and making threats against a vulnerable adult. She read them their rights while James secured the recording devices and gathered the fake documents they tried to make me sign. I sat in my kitchen chair watching my son being handcuffed and felt absolutely nothing. The woman who would have begged them to stop, who would have made excuses, who would have forgiven anything, she was gone. In her place was someone harder, colder, but finally free. The weeks after Nathan and Vanessa's arrest were strange and quiet. The house felt different, lighter somehow, even though what had happened was heavy enough to crush me. But maybe that was it. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't the truth. It was the not knowing. It was the pretending everything was fine when my own child was planning to destroy me. Now I knew. And knowing, as painful as it was, brought its own kind of peace. Nathan and Vanessa were released on bail within 48 hours. But there were conditions. They couldn't contact me. They couldn't come within 500 feet of my home. They had to surrender their passports. The district attorney filed formal charges: elder financial abuse, attempted coercion under duress, making criminal threats. Their attorney tried to negotiate, but Mr. Lang informed me the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings alone were damning. I filed a civil lawsuit as well. Mr. Lang said even if the criminal case somehow fell apart, I could pursue damages in civil court. He was thorough, protective almost. I think he'd seen too many elderly clients hurt by their own families. He wasn't going to let it happen to me. Sophie called me 2 days after her parents' arrest. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She said she'd known something was wrong but never imagined it was this bad. She said she was ashamed of them, ashamed to be their daughter. She asked if I could ever forgive her. I told her there was nothing to forgive. She was 16 years old and innocent in all of this. The sins of parents don't transfer to their children. I knew that better than anyone. My son had become someone I didn't recognize, but Sophie was still my sweet granddaughter, still pure and good. She asked if she could come stay with me for a while. Her parents' house felt toxic, she said. They weren't speaking to each other except to argue. They blamed each other for getting caught. Vanessa said Nathan had pushed too hard. Nathan said Vanessa had been too obvious. Neither of them, Sophie told me with bitter sadness in her voice, seemed to feel any remorse for what they'd tried to do to me. I told Sophie she could visit any time, but I couldn't let her stay without her parents' permission. Even now, even after everything, I had to follow the law. But we could spend time together. We could rebuild what her parents had tried to break. The next day, I did something I'd been putting off. I called Mr. Lang and told him I was ready to move forward with the inheritance. I wanted to use Aunt Beatrice's money, my money now, to start really living. I bought a small beachfront cottage on Anna Maria Island. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth. Just a peaceful 2-bedroom house with a porch facing the Gulf of Mexico, where I could watch the sunrise every morning with my coffee. The sound of waves became my new normal. The salt air healed something in me that medicine never could. I furnished it simply but comfortably. I bought books I'd always wanted to read. I took up painting, something I'd loved as a young woman but abandoned when Robert died and I had to work all those jobs. My paintings were terrible at first, but they got better. And even when they didn't, it didn't matter. I was creating something for myself, for the joy of it. Sophie came to visit every weekend. We'd walk on the beach collecting shells. We'd cook dinner together. She taught me recipes she'd learned in her home economics class. We'd sit on the porch and talk about everything. Her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Her worries about her parents. Her fears about whether she'd inherited their capacity for cruelty. I promised her she hadn't. I could see it in her eyes. She had her grandfather's kindness, his gentle heart. Whatever darkness had claimed Nathan had skipped right over her. I also did something else with the money. I established a foundation, the Brooks Haven Foundation, dedicated to supporting elderly victims of financial abuse by family members. I'd learned during this nightmare that it happened more than anyone wanted to admit. Adult children viewing their aging parents as ATM machines. Families torn apart by greed. The foundation would provide free legal assistance, counseling, safe housing when needed, and education about protecting oneself from exploitation. I hired staff, rented an office in Tampa, and threw myself into the work. At 68, I finally found my purpose. James Carver became an advisor to the foundation. Marie, my nurse from the hospital, joined our board. Even Detective Bennett helped us develop training materials for recognizing elder abuse. We were building something good from something terrible. I made friends too, real friends, not people who wanted something from me. There was Dorothy, a 72-year-old widow who lived 3 houses down and made the best key lime pie I'd ever tasted. There was Harold, a retired teacher who ran the bookstore in town and always set aside novels he thought I'd like. There was a whole community of people who accepted me for who I was, not what I had. I learned to stop feeling guilty for having money. For years I'd struggled, and I'd worn that struggle like a badge of honor. But Aunt Beatrice had wanted me to have this. She'd wanted me to be comfortable, to be safe. Accepting her gift didn't make me selfish. It made me wise. Nathan tried to write to me once. The letter was returned because of the restraining order. I wondered what it said. Whether he apologized or made excuses. Whether he understood yet what he'd done, or if he still blamed me somehow for his choices. I probably never know, and I was learning to be okay with that. Some nights I'd sit on my porch watching the sun set over the Gulf, and I'd think about the woman I used to be. The one who would have forgiven Nathan immediately. The one who would have paid his legal fees and blamed herself for his actions. The one who would have sacrificed herself over and over because that's what mothers do. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who'd learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's self-destruction. And at 68 years old, I'd finally learned to love myself enough to set those boundaries. The legal proceedings took 8 months to fully resolve. 8 months of depositions and court dates and lawyers in expensive suits sitting around conference tables. Nathan and Vanessa pleaded no contest to reduce charges in the end. Their attorney convinced them that going to trial with those recordings would destroy them completely. They received probation, community service, mandatory financial counseling, and were ordered to pay restitution. The civil lawsuit settled for a sum I donated entirely to the Brooks Haven Foundation. I didn't need their money. I needed them to understand there were consequences for what they'd done. But more than the legal outcomes, what satisfied me most was watching their house of cards collapse exactly as they built it, on lies and borrowed money and promises they couldn't keep. The friends and family they borrowed from demanded repayment. Nathan's contracting business folded when word got out about the elder abuse charges. Vanessa lost her position at the marketing firm. The scandal followed them everywhere in our small community. They had to sell their house eventually. They moved to an apartment in a different part of Tampa, starting over with nothing but their reputations in ruins. I heard all this through the small-town gossip network, through Sophie, through the occasional update from Detective Bennett. I didn't take pleasure in their suffering, but I didn't feel guilty about it either. They'd made their choices. These were the consequences. 6 months after the settlement, I received a letter. It came through Mr. Lang's office, properly vetted to ensure it met the restraining order requirements. It was from Nathan. 3 pages, handwritten, his familiar scrawl that I'd once treasured on Mother's Day cards. He apologized, not with excuses or justifications, but with what seemed like genuine remorse. He wrote about how the business failures had made him desperate, how Vanessa's family's expectations had pressured him, how he'd convinced himself that I was old and wouldn't need much, that he deserved something for all the years of being raised by a struggling single mother. He wrote that he'd been wrong about everything, that he'd lost himself somewhere along the way and couldn't find his way back. He wrote that he didn't expect forgiveness. He didn't ask to see me. He just wanted me to know that he understood now what he'd done, that he was ashamed, that he was sorry. I read that letter 3 times, sitting on my porch with the Gulf breeze moving through my hair. I cried, but they weren't the same tears I'd cried before. These were tears of release, of letting go. I did forgive him in a way. Not the kind of forgiveness that meant reconciliation or trust or letting him back into my life, but the kind that meant I wouldn't carry his choices like stones in my heart anymore. I wrote back 1 page, simple and clear. I told him I forgave him, but our relationship as it was could never exist again. I wished him well in rebuilding his life. I told him that Sophie would always have a relationship with me if she chose, and I hoped he'd support that. And then I sealed the letter and sent it through Mr. Lang's office, and I felt something close inside me that had been open and bleeding for months. Sophie graduated high school in May. I sat in the audience at the ceremony with tears streaming down my face, watching her walk across that stage. Nathan and Vanessa sat on the opposite side of the auditorium. We didn't acknowledge each other. We didn't need to. Sophie came to me afterward, threw her arms around my neck, and whispered that she'd been accepted to the University of Florida's veterinary program. I'd secretly paid for her application fees and her first year's tuition. That was between me and her. The Brooks Haven Foundation helped its first client in March, a 74-year-old man whose daughter had drained his savings account and abandoned him. We provided legal assistance, helped him recover some of his money, and set him up in a safe living situation with support services. When he came to thank me, His eyes filled with tears, and he said he'd thought no one would believe him. That's when I knew this work mattered more than anything else I'd ever done. I celebrated my 69th birthday on my porch with Dorothy, Harold, Sophie, and a few other friends I'd made on the island. We ate cake and watched the sunset, and someone asked me what I'd wished for when I blew out the candles. I told them I hadn't wished for anything because I already had everything I needed. That was true. I had peace. I had purpose. I had a granddaughter who loved me and friends who valued me. I had a foundation doing meaningful work. I had a home that felt like a sanctuary. I had mornings watching dolphins in the surf and evenings painting terrible seascapes and nights sleeping without fear. I'd spent so many years believing that a mother's worth was measured by how much she sacrificed, how much she gave, how completely she erased herself for her children. But I'd learned the hardest way possible that love without self-respect is just a different kind of destruction. At 69, I was finally whole. Not despite what happened, but because of it. The betrayal had broken me open, yes, but it had also freed me from living a half-life of service to people who didn't value me. It had forced me to choose myself for the first time in decades. Some people might think it's sad that I had to lose my son to find myself, but I don't see it that way anymore. I see it as the price of freedom. I see it as the cost of dignity, and I would pay it again. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in it, if you're the one giving and giving to people who only take, if you're the one making excuses for cruelty, if you're the one sacrificing yourself because you think that's what love means, please hear me when I say this. It's never too late. At 68, broken and betrayed, I started over. And if I can do it, so can you. You deserve to be loved properly. You deserve to be valued. You deserve peace. And you're strong enough to claim it, even when it means walking away from the people you thought you'd love forever. I sit here now watching the morning sun turn the Gulf waters gold, and I know I made the right choice. My life is smaller than it used to be, but it's wholly mine, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself.